Thank you so much, Hank, for your inspiring words. And thank you to the New Frontier Summit, to James Jenkins, and to the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation team. I'm Kim Coupounas from B-Lab, and as a proud alumna of the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, I have special love for President Kennedy's legacy and the Kennedy Library from my time in Massachusetts. And it's because of President Kennedy's moonshot vision and his legacy that my 10-year-old son wants to be an astronaut and one of the first humans on Mars. So thank you, Hank, for all that you're doing to help us get there. It is my absolute honor and privilege to join you and to introduce you to two extraordinary leaders for our time, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson and Dr. Katharine Wilkinson. We'll have a chance to hear from each of them in a few minutes, but to give you a glimpse of the heroines that you're about to hear from, Elle named Dr. Johnson one of the 27 women leading the charge to protect our environment, and Outside Magazine called her the most influential marine biologist of our time. And in 2019, Time Magazine named Dr. Wilkinson one of 15 women who will save the world. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll hear from these inspiring transformers about their newly released book, All We Can Save: Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. It is a powerful anthology of essays, art, and poetry that illuminates the expertise and insights of dozens of diverse women leading on climate in the United States: scientists, journalists, farmers, lawyers, teachers, activists, innovators, policy wonks, and designers across generations, geographies, and race. And it aims to advance a more representative, nuanced, and solution-oriented public conversation on the climate crisis. 2020 has been a year, my friends. We're confronted with a global pandemic, deep-seated racial injustice, a serious downturn in the global economy, and we are living in real time with the devastating impacts of climate change. I live with my family in the Rocky Mountain West, and we have had devastating wildfires this season, but nothing like those that are destroying parts of California, Oregon, and Washington. And what is happening in the American West is just the tip of the proverbial global iceberg. Many things have become clear over the last 6 months, including the fact that on this miraculous blue planet that we call home, we all breathe the same air. We are truly interdependent. The climate, biodiversity, and health crises are borderless. They make it clear that we have pushed our biosphere and our society way beyond our planetary and social boundaries. Without swift and immediate action at an unprecedented pace and scale, we will miss the window of opportunity to create the equitable, just, and regenerative future that our children deserve. Science and our lived reality are showing us that climate change will become a catastrophe that will dwarf the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. We need transformative leadership at every level of society. And as the authors point out so beautifully in the book, we are as a species and a civilization, we need healing for ourselves and for our planet. From my vantage point from within the business realm, business is uniquely culpable for the climate crisis, and therefore we are uniquely responsible, in my view, for fixing it. The B Corp movement that I'm proud to be a part of is working hard to equip businesses to do their part, from providing pathways to reinventing the very fabric of how capitalism works, to the nitty-gritty of how businesses must painstakingly decarbonize their models in the months and years ahead, and to the ways that businesses can show up with collective voice and action to solve this existential threat. As a climate warrior myself, as a mother, a sister, a daughter, and as a woman, everything about this book has resonated with me. Our news feeds are bloated with doom and gloom and disaster. Amidst the pandemic, amidst racial injustice, biodiversity loss, gross human inequities, and the climate emergency, how can we not feel despair? And yet, I would say that this book could not have come to us like the soothing and healing balm that it is at a better or more important time. Nor could there be a more appropriate book to elucidate the themes of the New Frontier Summit: systemic reckoning, collaborative leadership, scaling trust, and courage and commitment for solutions. Rolling Stone wrote of All We Can Save that it will make you feel hopeful about the climate crisis because it spotlights women climate leaders who are offering solutions, encouragement, and an invitation to join the movement. And I've been reading the book since it arrived at my house on Tuesday, and about every paragraph. I want to say, like, I want to stop and yell out loud, yes. I just want to read one snippet from this amazing book to give you a flavor of the power of voice and the clarity of understanding that both Ayana and Katharine have gifted to us all. The same patriarchal power structure that has oppressed and exploits girls, women, and non-binary people, and constricts and contorts boys and men, also wreaks destruction on the natural world. Dominance, supremacy, violence, extraction, egotism, greed, ruthless competition, these hallmarks of patriarchy fuel the climate crisis just as surely as they do in inequality, colluding with racism all along the way. Patriarchy silences, breeds contempt, fuels destructive capitalism, and plays a zero-sum game. Its harms are chronic, cumulative, and fundamentally planetary. That's some powerful stuff, my friends. I'm so grateful for the work that you have put together here, and I'm sharing it widely, I'll tell you. So welcome to our guests. Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson is a marine biologist, a policy expert, writer, and Brooklyn native. She is the founder and CEO of Ocean Collective, a consulting firm for conservation solutions grounded in social justice, and a founder of Urban Ocean Lab, a think tank for the future of coastal cities. And Dr. Katharine Wilkinson, my friend, is an author, strategist, teacher, and homegrown Atlanta native, named one of the 15 women who will save the world by time. Her writings include The Drawdown Review, the New York Times bestseller Drawdown, and Between God and Green. Ayana and Katharine, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Kim.
Hi. Thank you both. And thank you for helping us remember that we are creatures of possibility, that we are about goodness and optimism. Thank you. This book is really extraordinary. So I want to leap right into the book. Yes,
great job. I also happen to have a copy.
Sure, one or two in your garage, I'm guessing. So I want to just leap right into the book. Tell us about the title, All We Can Save, and the beautiful Adrienne Rich quote that you shared in the opening of the book. And I'm going to read that quote and then hand it over to you. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. There's so much in that. So could you unpack that a little bit and share why both of you thought this book and its ideas were so important to give to the world right now?
Thanks for leading with the presumption that this book is an important gift to the world. We'll take it. I think this book represents something that Katharine and I have seen as missing from the public discourse on what do we do with the fact that we are in a climate crisis, right? Not describing it, not sort of bemoaning it, but saying like, what does this mean for us as humanity, and what does the way forward look like? And offering, these 41 essays as 41 different answers to that question, as 41 different ways to contribute to solutions. And so that epigraph that you read is from a poem by Adrienne Rich called Natural Resources. It's just one stanza. And it opens with, as you read, my heart is moved by all I cannot save. And that we wanted to flip it on its head and say, ours too, but also by all that we still can. And that is the inspiration for the title of the book is, the acknowledgement that the world has fundamentally changed because of the emission of greenhouse gases and all sorts of other pollution and horrible things that have been done to the planet, but that we still get to write the future. And so that is sort of the energy we wanted to bring to this book, and what we feel is so needed in the public discourse. All of these voices that have extremely good answers to that question of where do we go from here, that we thought the world needed to hear, because, to date, we've been sort of had this public conversation on climate dominated by a fairly small group of white men who, sort of like brilliant and well-meaning as they are, will never represent the full spectrum of sort of like intellectual might and ingenuity that will sort of get us there. So how can we foster this whole new wave of leaders to help direct us?
Love it. Yep. And Katharine?
Well, Ayana covered that really, really beautifully. You know, I think the we and all we can save is really important. Not just that it is a big and mighty we, which we definitely need. But I think it invites us to think about how we come to this work, right? How we approach it in ways that welcome other people in, that keep one another feeling good and staying in the work. And we know, right, science, nearly 2 years ago now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put it in very plain language that we need unprecedented change in every aspect of the global economy. So if the task at hand is to radically and rapidly transform society to cut emissions in half this decade and move rapidly to a zero emissions future, well, we also need to then be transformational leaders. And I hope that's one of the things that people kind of come to a new understanding of in the pages of this book, of what transformational climate leadership can look like. And it turns out that kind of leadership is both more characteristically feminine and more faithfully feminist. And the good news is that is not just the domain of women, although women are bringing it in droves to the climate space. But that is really a kind of leadership that is open to people of any gender. And so we hope that while the focus in this book is on women, that the lessons of it are extraordinarily broad and encompassing.
Yep, I love it. I want to tap into something you were talking about, Katharine, and pull out something from the Rolling Stone review. Awesome review of the book, by the way. It says this book is a feast of ideas and perspectives, setting a big table for the climate movement, declaring all are welcome. And that is a comforting and much needed sentiment, particularly in a time when isolation and polarization feel like the dominant cultural modes of the day. A moment when we have so many of the solutions to the climate crisis in hand and just need people to come together to actually make them happen. And I'd say from that quote, like it really is an all hands on deck kind of moment in history. Yeah. And yet I find in my work, and I'm sure that this is kind of coming through in the stories, that figuring out how to do that radical collaboration is kind of the sticky wicket, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd like to hear both of you talk about how do you knock down those barriers, the barriers that have been a big part of getting in the way of us solving all kinds of challenges, but now we have a planetary challenge that needs radical collaboration.
Well, first, I love a cricket analogy, so thank you for that. And I just, your microphone is rubbing against your jacket and causing a bunch of stuff.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you telling me. Thank you.
So I think it's what Katharine was describing, this like a more stereotypically feminine qualities of nurturing and healing and collaboration and shine theory and sort of like, you know, making progress instead of like being right, and the collective over this sort of like individual hero, right? I mean, this is a book by a chorus, and I think the back cover, which is impossible to read, but you'll get the picture, just lists the name of every single contributor, the 41 essayists, the 17 poets, our illustrator, who's also in our mind a poet, because that's what we need, right? We need people from all over the country with all sorts of different areas of expertise, all genders, all sort of approaches to leadership, and races and ages. I mean, this is a book that spans like teenagers to grandmas, who each have something incredibly insightful to add. So when we think of how to build the biggest and most successful movement the world has ever seen, which is what's required, we think about like, how I love that Wilkinson uses that analogy of like, how do we set the table with places for everyone? And we do. It just felt amazing to read that review, because that is what we were trying to do.
Yeah, and to pick up on something you said, Ayana, I also love the fact that the audiobook has an even more diverse set of voices who are speaking the words of the stories and the contributions in the book. And you clearly have such a deep grasp of what stories and voice in this moment to kind of paint the full picture of humanity and why that is so needed right now to solve this crisis. I'd love to turn to
quickly on the audiobook, in case people are like sick of reading books. I just started listening to it last night. It is so good. It's Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Janet Mock and Alana Glazer and Sophia Bush and Alfre Woodard and Jane Fonda.
I think I want your Rolodexes.
I called in a lot of favors. I'll just say I'm like out of favors. But to see like these women immediately get the project and like want to be a part of it and want to lend their talents is exactly what the climate movement needs. Like, everyone bring your talents and figure out where they plug in. And, you know, Katharine and I have read every word in this book at minimum 10 times, but to hear these words read by these like powerful, rich, multi-layered voices, I was just like, knocked my socks off.
I love it. I can't wait
during dinner and just like listen.
I've been reading it, but I'm going to get the audiobook tonight. I love it. In the book, it's interesting. There have been many female climate warriors over the decades, you know, Rachel Carson among them. But in the book, you start the book by talking about Eunice Newton Foote, who I hadn't heard of, as the first climate feminist. She was the person who discovered that carbon dioxide would lead to planetary warming back in 1856. And she was also a signatory to the Seneca Falls Declaration on Women's Rights. You say she's a climate feminist, and that sounds like me. I'm sure it sounds like both of you. So can you share a little bit about what you mean by that moniker, and how can we all be climate feminists?
Yeah. We love Eunice so much. We feel like we're on a first name basis with her at this point. And we're really delighted that this book may help address to some small degree the not knowing about Eunice, who really should be a household name. And yeah, I mean, I think it's extraordinarily cool that the first woman to do, at least to publish, climate science was also a committed feminist. She was committed to a gender equal future. And delightfully, it turns out that her husband was as well, because he also signed the Seneca Falls Declaration. So it's, you know, what we love is that those two things have been hand in hand since the very beginning of women's leadership on this topic, from 1856 to today. And I think, you know, to me, what climate feminism means is understanding that the climate crisis and gender equality are utterly and inextricably linked with one another. So the sources of the climate crisis are gendered in nature, right? Kind of extractive capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy colluding, as you read, Kim, you know, to create the system that, among other harms, generates greenhouse gases that, in the words of Dr. Kate Marvel, lard the atmosphere. That when we think about the impacts of the climate crisis, those have disproportionate impacts on women and girls, especially when we're thinking about the global South, rural communities, indigenous communities, communities of color. And then also, and what we really kind of lean into in this book, of course, is that the solutions that we need to this crisis need to be at least gender equal in their sources. And we know still that there is an enormous gap from UN negotiations to the media to national legislatures to the fields of law, engineering, business, across the board, right? All of these decision-making tables where climate impacting decisions are being made, women are not represented equally. And of course, that is then dramatically less equal for women who are not white. And that's just not going to work because, as Ayana said so well at the beginning, we just have to be practical about this, right? We need the very best thinking from all corners of humanity coming together. We need that kaleidoscope, right? A single lens is just not going to work. And I think just the other piece of that is that there's kind of a growing body of evidence that outcomes are better. So this isn't just sort of, it sounds nice, right? It like sounds like a good theory of change. We actually do have research that shows that in countries where there is greater gender equality, carbon emissions are lower. That when legislatures are more gender equal or have more women than men, there's greater adoption of environmental treaties and environmental laws are stricter, and right, like we actually see this play out. So it's more than just, it seems nice. Yeah, jump in, Ayana.
Yeah.
I was just saying it's quantifiable, which is something that I hadn't known until we started writing the opening essay of the book together. Was just like that it's not some like wishful thinking that if we like, wouldn't it be great if women were in charge? It's like, no, literally it would be better.
Totally. Yeah. You know, the
like
other thing that I really,
like women don't have to run everything, right?
right.
And I think that's the one we're in. It's like we really need everyone. So like, why would we leave out half the brain power of the planet? Like,
Yeah, totally. It's, I'm sure like you both, I read a lot of climate stuff and it feels like we get just the facts, ma'am. It's like, here's the problem, here's the solution. It's, you know, and what I love about this book is that you've made room for your contributors to really embrace the grief, the horror, the scope and scale and how it impacts human hearts. And, you know, that's like a different narrative. That's a wholly different approach to how we talk about climate crisis and tackling. And would you kind of address, I know you've really made a clear case for why women need to be not only at the table, like need to be a major part of the solution to this, but what is the role of the feminine aspects of society, not just people, but like all of the ways that we think about the feminine narrative?
Yeah.
Katharine, do you want to talk about the feel section?
Yeah, definitely. So there are 8 main sections of the book, and one of them is called Feel, and it is very explicitly engaging with all the things, right? There are inescapably psychological and spiritual dimensions to the climate crisis, and we really believe that that we ignore those things at our peril, right? Because they're there, whether we want to address them and talk about them or not, they are definitely there. And they can either be part of what helps us arrive at deeper knowledge, deeper truth, and fuels action, or they can be things that keep us on the sidelines. And I think to your point, Kim, like when it's like just the science and here are some charts and look at the wind turbines, like that, you know, like
I do
great.
like a good wind turbine.
I do love a good wind turbine. But yeah, it's like I think we can railroad over the things that are coming up for people, which, like, you know, this is an existential crisis. We're asking existential questions. We've got big feelings about it. So let's like make space for that. And to your point, Kim, I think that your earlier question, I think that actually helps us create a more welcoming and inviting space, because I think for a long time, the climate movement has acted as if like people don't know and so they don't care. So we are just going to, this was a weird term that came out of my mouth in another interview. We're going to fact you up. Like we're just going to like smack facts all over you, and then you will wake up and you will care and you will do all
planetary mansplaining.
Planetary mansplaining, right? And I think like we forget that actually sometimes it's not that people don't care, but that caring and not knowing who to care with and what to do with that care is just too hard. And so people hang on the sidelines. So there are amazing pieces in that section by Ash Sanders, Amy Westervelt, Mary Hegler, Susie Moser. Who am I missing, Ayana? Emily Johnston, and some beautiful poetry. And I think sums up so well. There's a quote from Audre Lorde that our feelings are our most genuine paths to knowledge. So again, it's not just about like feeling is nice, right? But that like feeling is really important because we don't just know with our heads. We know with our hearts too.
Yeah, I was, as I was listening to the audiobook last night, I mean, obviously the feeling comes through much more when you hear it read. And I was listening to Ayana Glazer read Kate Marvel's essay about geoengineering. And then I texted her and I was like, this is so good. And she was like, you know, the essay that you just mentioned, Katharine, Ash Sanders wrote an essay called Under the Weather about sort of the anxiety and grief and sort of like, what do we even do with a challenge this big? And Ayana was like, reading that essay changed me. And she already got it, right? Like she was already like, we should do something about it. But like being given sort of the words or the commiseration or the framing to sort of let you like move past the feelings to the what next. Mm-hmm. We write in our begin essay, like, can't skip this part as like one of the ways we describe the feel sections. I know we all want to skip it and go ahead to the solutions and just like focus on decarbonizing the grid. And believe me, we need to do that. But we also need to just like make sure that we emerge whole and together. And so to your point, Kim, about like the power of the feminine in this moment is to harness this collectivism. Mm-hmm. And instead of saying like, we're each gonna do our own thing and somehow that will like magically all add up to the right outcome. Yeah. It's just not gonna work. Like we need to figure out how to do things in a collaborative and complementary way that really makes sure that the future is crafted in such a fashion that there's a place for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have so much I want to ask you about. We have only 10 minutes, actually more like 8 now. Go for it, Katharine.
I was just going to say, and when like, you know, the feminine, right, like can feel like this sort of fuzzy kind of concept. And I think it's just helpful to think about the feminine as like life force, right? It's like the thing that is life-giving, that persists despite all odds. And that like, yeah, we could use that for sure. right now.
You know, I kind of want to get to how we get to work and amplify these stories and this wisdom. I was trolling through both of your social media posts last night just to kind of get a sense of where your heart is on the release of the book. And Ayana, I saw some really powerful quotes from you about Black Lives Matter. And you've asked what might the way look like to go forward when Black Lives Matter. And we have climate justice and racial justice. And I'd love to hear you talk about what does that way look like?
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot this week, especially, you know, given the developments in Breonna Taylor's case and the sort of horrifying lack of justice there. And I also, I co-host a podcast called How to Save the Planet, which is about climate change. And we have been working on this episode for weeks about what the climate movement can learn from the Black Lives Matter movement. Mm-hmm. And one of the two people we interviewed for that episode is Colette Pichon Battle, who has this stunningly beautiful essay in the collection that was adapted from a TED Talk she gave. So if people can't wait to get their hands on the book, you can listen to her TED Talk right now and get like a good bit of the same material. And just, you know, the way that she frames these issues is that, you know, the way that the movement for Black Lives is organized, it is like when that movement first emerged in Ferguson, it was like deliberately looking at past social movements and saying, what do we need to do better? And number one was like this single charismatic leader thing, that does not work out. We need a leaderful movement. We need enough leaders that everyone can tell their own story, that we have this distributed network of, you know, chapters and individuals across the country and the world. And the way he described it, this guy Maurice, who was one of the people who was there in that sort of like incepting moment, he said, we need a social movement that is more like an ecosystem. And that just totally struck me as, you know, exactly what Katharine and I are trying to bring to the climate work. And what Colette says is we also need people who are accountable to the place we're from, right? A lot of the climate and environmental movement has been like, you know, very privileged people, almost always white, going to other places and telling them what to do. Or like, we have the solution, we have this technical solution. And instead, she's like, you need to be accountable to your communities. You need to go fix your home. We all need to like fix our homes in the places where we're from. And we need to be much more creative about it. And it's sort of like, no matter what you think of this movement, this like sort of slogan to defund the police, it has opened up a whole new conversation about what policing should look like and what is possible. And so she sort of like brings this question to mind of like, what would it look like if we thought that big about how we would transform systems as relates to climate?
This makes me think a lot about the Margaret Wheatley and Deborah Free's article about how social change really happens and the notion of emergence and how it has to start at home with communities of trust. And this is on a scale and a scope that we've never seen before, but that's exactly what you just described, Ayana, is right on in terms of how this has to happen, or we won't get where we know we need to go. Mm-hmm. We need to move in the direction of like wrapping, but I would love to have you each share, so the book includes a lot of calls to action. Each of your contributors has their own unique call to action. And each of them has a unique angle on solving this true crisis of our time. I would love to hear from you, not only what the most poignant calls to action are from your contributors, but maybe 3 things each of you would say we must do to care for the future of our species, you know, to solve this. Share with our audience today, what are your 3 things that they must do that comes out of the wisdom of the book?
Maybe, Ayana, maybe we can go back and forth.
Ooh, cool. I'm in.
That seems kind of fun. Mm-hmm. So one that's coming to mind for me today is Leah Stokes' essay, which moves from, it's kind of her own journey as a climate activist, a researcher, professor, public intellectual, from kind of the individual scale of actions, straws, bikes, you know, all of that good stuff, to rippling out to the collective action that we know is needed. There is no way for us to reduce ourselves into a clean energy grid, for example. We have got to link arms for systemic change. So I would say that would be the first thing. In what ways are you plugging into some kind of collective change? Local campaigns, elections, you know, any of those things, super important.
Yeah. Which reminds me of Kate Knuth's essay on becoming a climate citizen. I mean, Katharine and I raced to get this book out before the election. in hopes that it would spark some conversations about what kinds of climate policy we need in the US, and the role we can each play in holding our elected representatives accountable. So I would just like to offer up that term. Like, what does it mean to be a climate citizen? What does it mean to be a voter who prioritizes climate? And in this election at the presidential level, that could not be a more stark choice. And there are 3 or 4 women in this book who have helped to shape, dramatically improve Joe Biden's climate plan. And so it's interesting to also be able to see a little bit behind the curtain of how policy has evolved in the US in the last few years.
I love it. And I know you both have launched the All We Can Save project. Can you give me a one-liner version of what that is and how people can get involved?
Yeah,
definitely. This book wanted to be more than a book. And we know that there's a lot more work to do to support women's climate leadership. So that is what the All We Can Save project is designed for. We're going to do work around education, around community building, and then around direct financial support that is not a pittance, is not symbolic, is actually real funds to do really important.
like
I love it.
climate genius board. Does not sound like a good idea.
I love
it. There's more detail about the project and also about All We Can Save circles. So kind of deep dialogue reading circles that will kick off the week of October 5th, all on our website, which is allwecansave.earth. Which
I love it.
Is pretty easy to remember. What are we saving? Oh, right, .earth.
The planet. So friends, given the scope and scale of this climate crisis, it would be easy to stick our proverbial heads in the sand as a collective and as individuals, but we have to summon the truth, the courage, the solutions to turn away from the brink and towards the life-giving and the life-sustaining future we all know is possible. And All We Can Save can help us do that. So buy a copy of this beautiful, inspiring,
your climate denier,
life-changing book
and your activist team.
Yes, buy it for all your friends, buy it for community groups, for your company, for your organization. Give to the All We Can Save project, join one of the book groups. Ayana and Katharine, as Caroline Kennedy and Jack Schlossberg said, and others shared in the remarks to mark the 60th anniversary of JFK's New Frontier speech, the only valid test of leadership is to lead and to lead vigorously. Thank you both for leading vigorously.
Oh, thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Kim.